Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the content director here at Word on Fire. And joining us from California is Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop Barron, great to be talking with you.
Hey, Brandon. Good morning. Always great to be with you.
Well, I want to update everyone on a couple things here. One, on a somewhat lighter note, you just returned from the Big Focus conference. Give us a little recap of that.
Well, it was splendid. It was in Chicago. Now, of course, Chicago was awful. It's what I grew up with, 5 degrees above zero, freezing, cold. So it was a little bit depressing, but we were certainly warmed by the presence of about 8,000 college-age kids at the McCormick Place, which is the biggest convention center in Chicago. And I had the privilege of addressing them one evening and then Mass the next day. And there's so much to admire about Focus. I've watched them over the years, watched their growth in the spirit. And I remember the Mass, being very reverent and beautiful and pious in the best sense of the term. Then, before my talk in the evening, they were kind of rocking out. I mean, there were some bands there and the kids were really into it. And to me, that's the best combination. They're able to enter the Mass in the great reverent spirit, and they're still young kids having fun, and anyway, it was a very uplifting for me to be with those great people.
And you said at the end of your talk, you've said this many times in the past, that you think Focus is one of the radiant lights of the new evangelization.
I do. What I said to them was, I don't know any group or movement in the church right now that is truer to its charism than Focus. That Focus had a very clear identity and mission, and they lived up to it, and they've embodied it. So I deeply admire that. And I had a great breakfast with Curtis Martin, the founder, and his wife, and we had a wonderful, kind of conversation in the spirit about the church and where we're going and all sorts of good things. So that was uplifting for me.
So to watch Bishop Barron's talk, just go to wordonfireshow.com and listen to the last episode. We shared the audio from his talk.
Oh, is it up there now, the whole talk?
It is, yeah. So we got it up on
good.
Facebook. It's up on our podcast. So lots of ways to absorb it. But listen, I said that was a little bit of a lighter note. Here's a little bit of a darker note. Your region was hit so bad by all these devastating fires. We've talked about it here on the show, the Thomas fire, which resulted in so much devastation. You guys kind of got out of the clear from that, but then within the last few days, almost right on the back of that, you've experienced some more tragic natural disasters. Tell us about that.
In a matter of a few hours, we had far more loss of life than we had in the Thomas fire, which was here for about 3 weeks. It has been a brutal season for the part of California where I live, Santa Barbara, Montecito, especially right next to us. As you mentioned, the fire, which was the worst in modern California history. It was the most devastating wildfire. It just went out. It's just under control. And then this is the rhythm we have out here. The rains come, and they come this time of year in the winter. And this rain came at an incredibly intense rate. And what happens is when all that foliage and brush and trees are burned away, the soil becomes very loose. And so the rains come, and these mudslides develop, and they are devastating, sweeping away everything in their path, homes and so on. So there's been, I think the last report I heard was still 13 people have been confirmed killed. They expected to go much higher. So anyway, it's been awful. And please, everyone, keep praying for the beleaguered folks out here in this part of California. Even old timers, I've only been here for a couple of years, but people who've lived here for 30, 40 years have said to me, we've never seen the like of this. We've never seen such intensity in the fires and now these floods. So keep praying, everybody.
The very first person to lose their life in these devastating landslides was a man named Roy Roeder. Tell us about him.
Yeah, and this really added a lot of poignancy to it, especially for the Catholic community. Roy Roeder was a great man. He was the founder of the St. Augustine Academy in Ventura, a classical Catholic academy. He was very involved in the founding of the St. Monica's Academy. He was a great figure in the pro-life movement out this part of the world, and just kind of a pillar of the Catholic community. And so when I got that news just yesterday that he had died in these mudslides, it was just a very devastating thing. We're reaching out to to his family, but to the army of people who really loved and respected him. It's a real blow to the Catholic community out here.
So all of us, we encourage you to join in praying for Roy, his wife Teresa, everyone out there suffering these tragic mudslides.
Please.
Okay, Bishop. Well, let's switch gears now and turn our attention to the topic of this episode, which is Word on Fire in 2018. We're kicking off a new year here, and we did a lot of stuff last year. We've talked about much of it here on the podcast, but we wanted to give people a little teaser, a little idea of what's coming down the pipeline here from Word on Fire in the coming year. So I got a long list of things, and I wanted to just walk through them one at a time, get some of your quick feedback and some of your quick points. So first of all, you have several major talks scheduled for 2018. One of the first ones here is the Cardinal Foley Lecture. What's that about, and what are you going to speak on?
Yeah, that's in Philadelphia at the seminary. And I was asked by Archbishop Chaput and also by the auxiliary bishop, Bishop Tim Sr. out there, who's the rector of Charles Borromeo Seminary. And it's an annual lecture named for Cardinal Foley, who was one of the great communicators, one of the pioneers in the work that we're doing now. So that was part of the reason I accepted, but also because I have such great esteem for Archbishop Chaput. And he wanted me to talk about not so much the theoretical side, because he's read and heard me a lot on that, of the nuns and how to reach them and what are some of the cultural challenges and all that. He wanted me to talk about the practicalities of Word on Fire, of how it got going, how we started doing our work. So I was, more than happy to do that. So that will be a more historical kind of practical talk on Word on Fire, opportunities, challenges. I'm distilling a number of lessons from the story. That's the way I structured the talk. As I tell the story of Word on Fire, I'm distilling, I think it's 5 or 6 lessons for evangelizers today. So that'll be in late January, just coming up in a couple of weeks.
And then from the Cardinal Foley Lecture, you go to the Archbishop's Lecture in Denver. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and that's Archbishop Sam Aquila who invited me to give that. And this is a more serious lecture. He asked me to talk about the problem of relativism. And this goes back, of course, to at least to Papa Ratzinger, who identified the dictatorship of relativism as the major problem. And so he asked me to explore in that lecture the roots of relativism culturally, philosophically, and then how do we engage it? So if we grant that, yeah, that's a major problem, well, then what do we do with it? So that's what I did. That paper is more theoretical. I go into the roots of relativism, going all the way back to late medieval voluntarism and coming up through nominalism, and then into the modern period. Especially people like Nietzsche and so on, and then in the 20th century, Sartre and Foucault and many others that I'm arguing have shaped the way now even most young people think about the world. So then, having done that, I look at ways of engaging relativism. So that's the Archbishop's Lecture.
You have lots of other exciting talks and events. We want to highlight just one more here. This one is at Notre Dame University, and you're going to be keynoting a conference on youth, faith, and vocational discernment. Why is this conference so unique and interesting? Well,
that's the theme, of course, for the upcoming synod in October of 2018. So the gathering of bishops from around the world with Pope Francis to talk about this theme of young people and discerning the faith and their vocations, et cetera. So Notre Dame is a center for some of this work because of Christian Smith, the great Catholic sociologist who's written extensively on young Catholics, fallen away Catholics, the nuns, et cetera. So what I'm doing in that talk is actually taking some of Christian Smith's most recent findings and then doing some musings on that. So my own sort of theological and evangelical reflections on these findings. So I'm doing the keynote for that conference. I'll be there for a couple of days. I'm just praying now, especially I'm looking at Philadelphia, Denver, and Notre Dame in the wintertime. So if I make these trips without any snow, it'll be kind of a miracle. But I'm always excited to go back to Notre Dame.
We'll have to get you a sled and a pack of dogs to get you out there probably.
That would help.
Okay, so in addition to the talks, you'll also be traveling to do a little more filming for your Pivotal Players series, this round 2, volume 2. We've got 6 new episodes coming out. You're going to be working on 2 of them this summer. Tell us about those.
Yeah, last summer, and again, when I was doing the Catholicism series years ago, Cardinal George basically gave me the freedom just to do that. And that's why we were able to film that pretty quickly. I filmed the whole 10 episodes in just under 2 years. I don't have that luxury anymore because I've got a lot on my plate. But so when we get away for these film trips. We did Benedict and Augustine last summer. And this coming summer, we'll be doing Fulton Sheen and Flannery O'Connor. So I'll be in this country. It'll be a little bit easier trip. But we go to, Peoria, where Fulton Sheen was ordained, that area where he's from. We'll be in Washington. We'll be in New York. For Flannery, New York, but also in Iowa, where she went to the famous writers' workshop. We'll be down in her neck of the woods, down there in Andalusia in Georgia. So I'm looking forward to that. It'll probably be, 10 days or 12 days of filming. And those are two such great figures. And so that probably in July we'll be doing that.
I think most people listening to this know about Fulton Sheen. I think we've even done an episode on Fulton Sheen. Yeah. But tell us, what makes Flannery O'Connor a pivotal player?
Oh, my gosh. She's, in my judgment, the greatest Catholic writer of fiction in the 20th century. I mean, she'd rank up there with Evelyn Waugh and others. I just think Flannery O'Connor in the 20th century articulated really better than anybody else in that literary form the spiritual struggle of our time. There's nobody, in a way, darker than Flannery O'Connor who understood the fall more completely. And that's why, people like the Coen brothers today who explicitly call upon her. So she got that all the way down. There's not one bit of naivete or of sentimentality or romanticism in her vision. At the same time, she was exquisitely attuned to these breakthroughs of grace. How does God break into our dysfunctional human condition? And see, given the fall, God often has to do that in a very disruptive, very violent, interruptive way. And her stories, of course, they're like biblical stories. But she tells it with such aplomb and with such panache and with such imagination and humor and literary power that I think she really is a pivotal player. And I mentioned the Coen brothers. I can mention many others that she's impacted. And there's a whole way of approaching these questions that is typically O'Connor-esque. So it makes her a very important figure in the popular culture today.
We just went through the Golden Globes, the 2018 Golden Globes. One of the movies that received lots of nominations and several awards was Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which I know you've seen. We haven't really talked about it, but that movie, you said from the very beginning, had a very clear influence by Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah, because one of the main characters, the movie, I think it's the opening scene of the movie. You see him sitting at his desk and he's reading A Good Man Is Hard to Find, the collection of her short stories. And I would say that movie, I don't think I've written about it yet, is very O'Connor-esque. That my hesitation is it's Flannery O'Connor without the grace. You know what I'm saying? It's all the elements, the dark and the darkly comic and the edgy and all that is there. But what I was missing, and it's part of our postmodern thing, that we just can't summon either the courage or the clarity to talk about grace. And I again, it's complicated. We could go into more detail on it, but I miss that element. Flannery got the balance right, which is why she's so powerful.
Well, we'll talk much more about Flannery O'Connor and Fulton Sheen here in the coming months as we pop out those two episodes. Next up, though, I want to talk about the Word on Fire classics. Now, these were a surprisingly big hit. We started releasing Word on Fire versions of some Catholic classic books right before Christmas of 2017. The first four we released were Augustine's Confessions, G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, John Henry Newman's Essay on the Development of Christian Doctrine, and then Thomas Merton's Seven Story Mountain. We're going to be releasing some more classics in 2018, but Bishop, I wanted to hear from you. This was something you've long been recommending, that people return to the classics, that they read. Why is this so important for Catholics?
Well, because I think a lot of Catholics don't know our own great tradition, and so much of that is locked up in these books. And, this is a pet peeve of mine. I guess I'm becoming a cranky old man, but based on years of teaching as well, I think for the younger people, it's just much harder to summon the discipline to sit down and really plow through a great book. We're such a screen-oriented culture, such a kind of whiz-bang, get it fast, move on to the next thing. And I really want to encourage Catholics to say, no, I'm going to spend maybe, weeks or months with a really great book and savor it and move into its nuance and complexity. And so I've wanted to encourage that. So we brought these books out that had a big impact on me when I was coming of age, books that really impacted my own thinking and my life. I think of Merton's Seven Storey Mountain had a big impact on my sense of vocation. And we wanted to package them in a very beautiful way. So they're brought out in lovely hardcover editions, with a bookmark, and they're beautifully produced, just to try to draw people back into this leisurely, meditative reading of these great texts. So maybe it's my teacher's background. Maybe it's my little prophetic stance against the, whiz-bang jump from screen to screen culture that dominates a lot of younger people today, is let's get back into serious reading.
All right. The next couple projects I want to talk about, we're just going to cover fairly briefly. I just want to give people a little bit of a teaser on these. Both of these you mentioned in your book with John Allen, To Light a Fire on the Earth.
Yeah.
In the last chapter of that book, you describe how over the last few years, there's been this organic evolution of Word on Fire from a ministry into a movement, sort of this international movement of people from all forms of life who seem directed toward this life of evangelization. And so the next two projects we're working on in 2018 are aimed at helping accomplish that end. The first one is what we're calling the Word on Fire Institute. And this is going to be a sort of training ground for new evangelists where teachers like you and other people we're bringing in will lead short courses on how to evangelize in light of many of these Word on Fire principles. Why are you excited about this Word on Fire Institute?
Well, it's what I felt the movement of the Spirit there in my own heart, that we've had, I think, great success with Word on Fire as a ministry, as a vehicle for the announcement of the gospel, but to turn this more into a style of life, into a movement. My hope here is that we'd form a group of people around the country, united through the internet, who are interested in deepening their own spiritual life around what, in my judgment, is the central need of our time, which is to evangelize the culture. So to give people specialized training, as you say, in this area, in theology and spirituality and practical evangelism, because I think we need to build up an army of evangelically minded Catholics if we're going to turn the tide on this question. So I've just been, kind of moved by the Spirit to explore this for a long time. And now I think we're getting it, really off the ground.
There will be many, many more details to come over this next year regarding the Word on Fire Institute. So stay tuned to the podcast here and Word on Fire's website for much more. The second project, which is linked to this institute and this burgeoning movement, is what we're calling the Word on Fire Bible. We're working on a new Bible that will be aimed at the nuns, people who have no or little religious experience, maybe who have never read the Bible or don't understand it. It will contain the whole biblical text, of course, so we're not rewriting the Bible itself, but the biblical text will be arranged alongside commentary from Bishop Barron, from different theologians, saints, spiritual masters that illuminate the text. Bishop, why is the Bible so critical to evangelization?
Well, I'll tell you, Brandon, I've been saying this for a long time, that I do think Vatican II, in many ways, is a great unrealized council. A lot of things that we called for in Vatican II have not yet happened. That's why when people are calling for Vatican III, I say, no. Vatican II has barely been implemented, And one of those areas I think of non-implementation is the biblical renewal that was called for by Vatican II. Now, it's a complicated thing. There's all kinds of reasons for it. But I think if you talk to most Catholics today about the Bible, they're largely clueless. And I don't say there's a critique of them. I think it's a failure at many levels since the council. But the council wanted us to be more, not less biblical, to be more in touch with the great story of Israel. Because I've been arguing, I said it in fact at the Focus Talk, you won't evangelize about Jesus without understanding the story of Israel, because evangelization means the good news, the euangelion, that the king has come, the King of Israel has arrived, that the hopes and promises of Israel have been fulfilled. Well, what's Israel? What are its hopes and promises? What does it mean to be the King of Israel? Unless you know the Bible, you won't know anything about that. And if you don't know that, you won't be able to evangelize. So we hope this Word on Fire Bible, as you say, that has a lot of commentary from the great people that have informed my own thinking over the years, the church fathers and Aquinas and the great doctors and so on. Our hope is that it would help people now move into the biblical text. I think it's essential to evangelization. I think, again, I've got focus on my mind. What those young focus missionaries do is they draw people into Bible study, as a first step. And I think that's really a good instinct. So that's what's behind the Word on Fire Bible.
So again, more details to come on that in the coming year. Next up is another exciting project. Word on Fire is partnered with Flocknote. Flocknote is an email and text messaging tool used by thousands of parishes. And we've sort of used their communication tool and paired it with our content to be able to offer Bishop Barron videos and study programs in parishes all over the country. Bishop, for years, one of the ways that Word on Fire has accomplished this work of evangelization is through parishes. We do all this stuff online. We're reaching people all over the world, but we still try to get our resources into parishes. Do you think that the parish is often a central route of access for people even today?
Yeah, and it should be. And, and increasingly today, see, people that go to parishes, we talk about the nuns a lot, those who have fallen away. But so those who remain, who go to parishes, they're a core team. I think if we're talking about evangelizing the world, we start with those that come to Mass on a regular basis, those that participate in parish life. So yeah, I want to form them in a sort of privileged way, in a heightened way. But I also want Catholics to get an increased sense that parish involvement is not just going to Mass on Sunday, as indispensable as that is. It's now being sent forth from Mass as an evangelist, right? Go and teach all nations. Or we say at the end of Mass, the Mass ended, go glorifying the Lord by your life. That means your life is radiant with what you've taken in at the Mass. So that's why I feel strongly about getting our materials into parishes precisely. So that core team can be formed for evangelization.
This is one thing we hear often from pastors and parish leaders, that it's so difficult to form people in between Sundays. So on Sundays, you maybe only have 25% of your Catholics on the roster even coming to Mass, period. But then beyond that, in between Sundays, we can't reach or shape or form our people. They're not coming to our events. They're not signing up for small groups. So we're hoping that this new initiative will help solve at least a piece of that problem. So stay tuned here to the podcast and the website. We'll have lots more about that coming forward. Okay, Bishop, next up is your Mystery of the Mass film series. So you recorded this in late 2017. We're going to release it here in 2018. Lots and lots of people ask us to produce more resources on the Mass. Do you find that even today, even among Catholics who go to Mass every Sunday or all the time, we're still not understanding its full depth?
Yes. And see, again, to go back to my comment about Vatican II, part of the Vatican II renewal was a liturgical renewal, right? The Mass is the source and summit of the Christian life. Vatican II was informed by the liturgical movement of the first half of the 20th century. I think, this is based on 31 years of priesthood, I think even a lot of committed Catholics who go to Mass don't really understand what the Mass is. Especially among younger Catholics. I think for way too many of them, the Mass is like a religiously themed jamboree. So let's all get together and we'll sing songs about the Lord and we'll kind of feel good about ourselves being together. And all that's fine, of course. I got nothing against religiously themed jamborees. But the Mass is something very distinctive. So I wanted for a long time to do an extended reflection on the Mass. And so you're right, it's a couple months ago, out here in Santa Barbara, before we had the fire and the floods, we gathered at a beautiful church in downtown Santa Barbara, and we got about 1,000 people, I think, in that church. And I did a series of 6 talks on the Mass. And so Spirit Jew Studios from Chicago that have done a number of our shorter videos. They're producing that right now. We hope it'll be out. We're pretty confident in the fall, huh? And I do hope people take advantage of that because that affects every single Catholic. And if Vatican II is right, source and summit of the Christian life is the Mass. So what are we doing at the Mass? What are its implications? That's what I explore in this video.
Last item on the list here, and it's not a minor one. You are now the chair of the USCCB's Committee on Evangelization and Catechesis.
Yeah.
Your 3-year term has officially begun. So in 2018, a lot of your attention is going to be devoted to this committee. Can you give us maybe a few teasers or a few previews of what you're going to focus on?
Yeah, this is a committee whose purpose is to help the bishops in these areas. So evangelization, catechesis are the two main emphases. I've narrowed it down to the nuns. So under evangelization, who are the nuns? How do we find them? How do we re-engage them? And then secondly, catechist formation. So everyone seems to think that the key to a renewal in catechesis is not so much new programs, that's part of it, but it's the training of catechists themselves. And more than just training, the formation of catechists as bearers of the faith. So I've made those the two priorities. And so the committee, with our consultants and experts and with the other bishops, we discuss those issues and try to come up with some good recommendations for the bishops. Now, given the way the church is structured, we don't have the kind of executive authority now to make all this happen. It's more of a recommendation because each bishop has the right, of course, to decide what to do in his own diocese. But anyway, that's the work of the next 3 years for me will be on this committee. And I'm looking forward to it.
Well, we've covered here almost a dozen new and exciting initiatives for 2018. One question I know lots of people are probably thinking, Bishop, how in the world do you do all this stuff? How do you get any sleep?
I do. And it's a very simple answer. It's because of you and people like you that I have this Word on Fire team that really makes all this possible. I provide some of the basic content, but all the, the details and practicality and so on is covered by the team. As I look over this list, it's in front of me here on the screen. The lectures, I wrote most of those last summer. So the summertime is a little more of a downtime. I think it was just like around our Word on Fire trip to Europe. I did some of the writing on those lectures so that they're out of the way. I'm not brooding about them now. They're already done. But you guys do a lot of the legwork on this. So I have time to do my job up here in Santa Barbara.
So a big shout out to the rest of the Word on Fire team.
Absolutely.
I think we are up to about 15 people now scattered all over the country. We got some amazing, gifted, holy people. So big kudos to the entire Word on Fire team.
Absolutely.
Okay, next up, it's time for our question from one of our listeners. Bishop, today we have a question from Jennifer in Milwaukee, and she asks a question about a topic you dearly love, books. So here's Jennifer's question.
Hi, Bishop Barron. This is Jennifer, and I'm in Milwaukee. My question is, I started reading the book, A Course in Miracles, and then I started wondering, maybe this book is not God-inspired, and maybe it's taking me further away from my faith. So I guess, how do you judge when you're reading something, whether it's a worthy read or if it's something that you should not read or you should read critically? And I guess that's just my confusing. I don't want to read something that's going to take me away from my faith more.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that question. It's a good one. I read A Course in Miracles many years ago. It's kind of the standard Bible or textbook of a New Age spirituality, grounded in what they call the Philosophia Perennis, the sort of standard look at Star Wars. You'll find a lot of the Course in Miracles. Here's my basic answer to you. There is so much of value in the great Catholic literary and theological and philosophical tradition to read first before you get to the Course in Miracles. I mean, I think it's okay to read a book like that when you're really grounded in the great tradition and you can make the proper judgments about it. I read it, and a value to it, I think, is it helps you understand some of the culture, where people are at. But what I would say to you is start with the great classics. I might recommend, go get the Word on Fire classics. Get those 4 books. Read Chesterton first. read Newman first, read The Seven-Story Mountain first, read the Confessions first, read Mere Christianity first, read The Lord of the Rings first, is stay with the great Catholic classics. And then you'll get a foundation in the intellectual order that will allow you to branch out. Now, someone like, in my background, I was an academic. And so I had to read all these books because I had to know, what was going on in the wider academic culture. So I've read very widely in different points of view, and Protestants and non-Christians and secularists and all that. But I think for most people who aren't professional academics, there's so much to read in the great Catholic, classical, spiritual, theological, and philosophical tradition. Start with those. And then, look at some people who have given lists of recommended books. I think that Brandon, hasn't Peter Kraft done that? And many others have recommended.
He does.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we actually have a list of your recommended books floating around. So I'll tell you what, we'll put that here beneath the show notes. I'll also add a link at wordonfireshow.com/books. I think we got a list of a few dozen books that you've recommended in the past.
Good. Okay, that's great.
Well, listen, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Word on Fire Show. We have so much exciting stuff coming down the pipeline in 2018, including a few more surprises we didn't get into here, including a couple of new books and some other fun stuff. So stay tuned here closely to the Word on Fire Show podcast, to our website, our Facebook page, and you'll be the first to hear about all these exciting new projects. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire Show.